know who I am. You all know what I do for a living.
Frank Mundus landed some of the largest great white sharks ever recorded.
No fish was too big for him to tackle. He wanted to catch the biggest white shark that he could.
I remember 3,427 pounds, just like a Volkswagen. That was a big fish.
Like a real-life Captain Quint.
Quint was fiction. Mundus is reality.
Now,
So keep your eye on the program.
Frank is warming up for a face-to-face encounter with South Africa's famous flying sharks. Great whites that explode from the water to hunt seals. Frank saw his first great white in the waters off Montauk, New York in the 50s, and instantly he was hooked. He became the only fisherman on the East Coast to target sharks, and built a successful charter business catching a fish that, at the time, no one else wanted.
Nobody really thought about sharks. Nobody wanted to catch sharks. When we first started fishing in 1951, it was considered snake hunting. It was considered collecting garbage.
He created a whole industry that didn't exist, and he was the pioneer. He was the first person to do this.
Frank called it monster fishing. It was a way to lure customers onto his boat and show them firsthand that the shark was a world-class game fish that was fun to catch.
We had to nickname it monster fishing because we couldn't call it shark fishing. If we said that we was going to take you out shark fishing, you'd turn around, run up the dock, and jump in your automobile and go. You would always come to me and say, Frank, you know, the only thing we caught today was sharks, but we had so much fun. What do you say the next time we go shark fishing? Where could the average worker go to catch a fish over 100 pounds? Couldn't afford to go to Acapulco, but he could afford to go to Montauk.
This became the big game fish for the average guy. If you wanted to catch a big fish, you better be fishing for sharks.
Hunted and hated, there was little sympathy for the creatures considered man-eaters.
In those days, people hated the sharks. When we would bring in a decent-sized shark, there'd be 50 people on the dock jumping up and down, hollering, hooray, hooray, Mundus brought in a shark. Hooray, kill them all. Kill all them buggers. Right.
A good shark was a dead shark. It's an overworked term, but that was essentially the situation in the early 60s. So if you brought in sharks, everybody thought it was really great that you did. You're reducing the danger to man.
Today, as a end of
he was head and shoulders above all of them.
You had the whole range of, I like him, I hate him, he's a great guy, he's a no-good SOB.
Unforgettable, obnoxious, charming at times.
Dan Levin, a staff writer for Sports Illustrated, wrote about Mundus in 1983.
I didn't have to exaggerate when I wrote about Frank. Just wrote about some of the things he'd done, and they were literally unbelievable. And I spoke to some of the people who fished with him, and the stories they told were the stuff of legend. And this is why Frank became a legend.
He even painted his toenails, and one was red and one was green. A safari hat he had, earrings, he probably started the earrings that the kids wear today.
Arrogant, nasty, probably one of the craziest people I've ever met. Probably the only person I knew that has got thrown out of more places in Montauk than me.
Every time somebody climbed on the boat, they would always ask me, are you in your right mind? And I would say no. If I was, I wouldn't take you out.
There was a lot of grousing about Frank over the years, but I think ultimately what they concluded, and this is the feeling they had, was he's a nut, but he's our nut.
Nowadays, everybody's a conservationist, even myself.
Frank will most likely be remembered as a source of inspiration for the infamous Captain Quint. Jaws author Peter Benchley fished with Mundus in 1966 and later wrote the novel that featured an obsessed shark hunter.
Yeah, I even modeled Quint around me, but the only problem was he didn't make him ugly enough. Quint would, as you remember in the movie, he scratched the blackboard and he says, "You all know me. You all know what I do for a living." Well, everybody knows me and my boat, and they know what we were. We're both mavericks, so to speak. We both do something that nobody else wanted to do or nobody else would do, and that is to go shark fishing.
Quint was fiction. Mundus is reality. So what they did is they took Mundus, the reality, the real man, and then they bastardized him, or they modified him to become Quint, the character.
There was a lot of stuff that happened in the movie Jaws that was right out of Frank's book.
Frank wrote Sport Fishing for Sharks in 1971.
From the looks of the boat to the, some of the things that they did in the movie were similar to what would really happen, but most of them were exaggerated.
Years ago, when this was going on, Frank was drinking pretty good, and he could be nasty. And that's the way Quint was portrayed.
In Frank's drinking days, he probably reminds us more of Quint with that type of swagger, the drinking in the daytime kind of a thing, and his determination to win at all costs over the shark.
Mundus and Quint also shared a hatred for the two-way radio. No matter how big the shark or how dangerous the predicament, neither captain would think of calling for help.
All my customers that knew me knew I hated the radio. I'd never turn it on.
Parker, come in.
One of the customers would say, "Well, why don't we radio for help?"
Coast Guard, this is New Yorker. Do you...
The first guy that touches that radio is going to get a broken arm.
Excuse me, Chief.
Most of the people in Montauk, and certainly Captain Frank, felt that Quint was patterned after him. And in fact, some of his earlier landings of big sharks with harpoons and so on are very similar to what happened in the movie.
He thinks the bait is now your hand. And when you lift your hand up, he follows it because he thinks the bait's going up. Look at the boat and start biting the engines. So we started fending them off, pushing them away.
Before I go, I want to give you my Monster Man book, and I hope that you enjoy it. It's a lot more fun playing games with him than it is catching them, because he'll be there tomorrow. He'll be there tomorrow when we play with him.
But in the 1980s, hunters played a different kind of game with the great white. For Frank, the object of that game was catching the largest shark on record.
I remember 3,427 pounds. It's like a Volkswagen. And I remember how big it was because it was laid out on 2 sheets of plywood. It was 16 feet, 1 inch long. It was a big fish.
In August 1986, Mundus would have his chance to make history, hooking a shark nearly 800 pounds heavier than the existing world record. It spread that a dead whale, a favorite food of the great white, floated several miles off Montauk. When Mundus arrived at the carcass, it was riddled with massive bite marks, but with no sharks in sight. Crew members fished off the belly of the giant, waiting for the sharks to return.
So we basically, hand-to-hand wrestled with that thing, putting a tail rope on him. And once we got a tail rope, and then we put another tail rope, and then another tail rope, and then another tail rope on him, Frank put the boat in gear, and that was it. It was all over for the shark. We had him.
They had the shark, but Mundus could not be sure of a world record. The only option was to tow it in and find a scale large enough for this remarkable giant.
This one we had to call in ahead of time for 2 reasons. One, we had a possible world record. The other reason was I knew somebody had to get in their car, some volunteer, and they had to travel halfway down Long Island to get the big commercial scale that weighed up to 5,000 pounds. When I did, the word traveled around Montauk like wildfire. When we got back to the dock, there was over 1,000 people on the dock at midnight.
They got that fish on the dock and flopped it on the dock. They weighed it. I remember 3,427 pounds. It's like a Volkswagen. And I remember how big it was because it was laid out on 2 sheets of plywood. It was 16 feet, 1 inch long. And the girth, I believe, if I'm correct, it was 12 foot something inches.